The man of weak will never knows what he truly desires, and that is why he is easily ruled. Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche, regarded as the most controversial German philosopher of the modern age, would never place trust in someone lacking strength. In his view, weakness wasn't a neutral trait, it was toxic, a form of deception disguised as a moral virtue, he proclaimed. In this video, we'll dive deep into Nietzsche's intense disdain for weakness. What did he perceive behind notions like humility, compassion, and kindness? And ultimately, why did he believe that only strength could give birth to real virtue? Get ready for an intense exploration into the most provocative aspects of Nietzsche's philosophy, because maybe, just maybe, what we often call weakness is the greatest illusion of all. What Nietzsche meant by weakness. So, what does it truly mean to be weak? What, according to Nietzsche, defines genuine weakness? Many might say it's simply a lack of physical strength, fearfulness, or emotional sensitivity. But for Nietzsche, it ran far deeper. His concern wasn't with brawn or superficial bravery. The weakness he condemned was something else. The inability to act upon one's own will, the lack of internal coherence, a fractured soul. In Nietzsche's eyes, a weak individual is one who constantly wavers. He lacks direction. He adopts others' beliefs without question. He is afraid of his own convictions, too afraid to take a stand against the world and, more importantly, against himself. He betrays his own values. Worse, he lies to himself in the name of a peace that doesn't truly exist. Nietzsche argued that such weakness wasn't merely harmful, it was infectious. In their fear, the weak manipulate those around them to also bend, to feel guilty for their strength, for their resolve, for their bravery. In doing so, the world becomes more bearable for those who can't confront their own fragility. True weakness, in Nietzsche's view, is the inability to sustain a purpose or direction. The weak begin a journey, but abandon it at the first sign of difficulty. They claim to want something, but secretly avoid the cost of achieving it. They would rather justify their failures than transform them into growth. One of the most dangerous traits of weakness, he believed, was its ability to disguise itself. It wears noble masks. It goes by names like kindness, empathy, or surrender. But beneath it all lies fear. Fear of pain, of choice, of freedom. Compassion is a virtue of the weak. They use it to keep the strong in check. Friedrich Nietzsche. The strength Nietzsche admired wasn't brutality, it was clarity. It was the courage to know what you want, and to uphold that desire even in the midst of turmoil. It was honesty, especially when it hurt. It was refusing to betray oneself. Weakness, by contrast, was the abandonment of that honesty. It was living passively. It was the comfortable lie. It was choosing not to choose. To Nietzsche, this wasn't just an existential failure, it was a moral one. The weak man, rather than acknowledging his own helplessness, builds a delusion in which he sees himself as noble, righteous, and virtuous, while in truth, he's merely hiding from who he really is. And perhaps that's why Nietzsche couldn't stand the weak, because where there is weakness, there is deception. And where deception lives, the soul begins to rot. The psychology of weakness, self-deception, and cowardice. If weakness is a form of dishonesty, how does it appear in our daily lives? How does it operate within us, often without our awareness? Nietzsche understood that the most dangerous lie is the one we tell ourselves. That's why he considered weakness a form of self-deception. It's not merely about lacking strength. It's about refusing to acknowledge our own limitations. It's pretending to be fine when we're internally shattered. It's repeating to ourselves that everything is okay, even as our heart silently screams the opposite. A powerful illustration of this appears in the short story White Nights by Fyodor Dostoevsky. The main character, a dreamy and idealistic young man, meets Nastenka, a woman aching over an unfulfilled love. They share heartfelt, vulnerable moments together. Gradually, she seems to warm to him, and there's a fragile hope, the possibility of something real. But in the end, her former lover returns, and she runs back to him, leaving the protagonist utterly heartbroken. That's the moment where weakness reveals itself. The young man convinces himself he's glad for her, that her happiness is all that matters. But deep down, he's in agony. He lies, not out of nobility, but because he lacks the courage to face the painful truth. This is the kind of weakness Nietzsche loathed, the inability to be honest with oneself, to confront life without illusion. To him, that attitude was an escape from reality, a retreat masked as virtue, the defeated cloaking themselves in false nobility. Decades later, Carl Jung offered a similar psychological perspective. He proposed that there are aspects of ourselves we reject and bury in the unconscious. These hidden elements form what he called the shadow, and the more we deny this shadow, the more it secretly takes control over us. Jung famously wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Carl Jung. Though they lived in different eras, Nietzsche and Jung both agreed. True growth is only possible through honesty. But weakness blocks that path. It makes us strangers to ourselves. And the most troubling part? We often don't even notice. Self-deception keeps us stuck. It paralyzes us. It stops us from taking action, from chasing our desires, from healing old wounds. It turns us into passive observers of our own existence. It feels easier to pretend we never wanted it that badly, to believe it was for the best. That fate knew what it was doing, but beneath it all, we're just shackled by the fear of being hurt again. Nietzsche believed that this refusal to face pain was the root of a life drained of depth, passion, and authenticity. Weakness, then, isn't merely a flaw. It's a subtle poison that pulls us away from our true selves, and the first step in defeating it is to stop lying. When the will shatters, the birth of nihilism. Nietzsche believed that at the core of every weakness lies a fractured inner force, a will that has lost its unity. When this will breaks apart, the person becomes uncertain of what they truly want. Or worse, they may know, yet feel powerless to move toward it. This fracture marks the threshold into nihilism. To Nietzsche, nihilism wasn't merely a loss of meaning. It was the paralysis in the face of existence itself. It's when no path seems worthwhile and no decision endures long enough to yield anything meaningful. A fragmented will splits itself, contradicts itself, and ultimately turns against itself. The individual becomes driven by fleeting impulses, unable to affirm a direction. He saw this as a profound spiritual collapse, the breakdown of inner authority. And without that inner compass, the individual is left exposed, not only to the chaos of the world, but also to the disarray within. A historical example captures this vividly: King Edward II of England. Though he sat on the throne with all the power it carried, he lacked the resolve to uphold decisive leadership. He was swayed by favorites, inconsistent in his actions, and ultimately lost everything, including his life. His reign was torn apart by internal strife, fed by his indecision. Nietzsche would argue, power alone is not enough. Direction is essential. This same concept applies to the character Malenkov, portrayed in the film The Death of Stalin. He's shown as someone easily swayed, constantly shifting his stance based on whoever spoke to him last. His will wasn't his own. It was borrowed, and that absence of firmness made him unfit to lead. Nietzsche maintained that this internal disintegration creates the perfect soil for nihilism to grow, when everything seems possible, yet nothing ever materializes. When the world offers endless choices, but none take root. And worst of all, the person adapts to this condition. They begin to see stagnation as balance. What frightens me most is not the monsters, but the lack of direction within the soul. Friedrich Nietzsche. This loss of direction, the swarm of conflicting desires that cancel each other out, results in paralysis. And that paralysis is the first step toward collapse, not just of action, but of life's very meaning. Willpower must be structured. It needs a center of gravity. Without that, a person becomes lost within themselves. And then, quietly and invisibly, weakness begins to win. Compassion as a trap and tool for manipulation. From a young age, we're taught that compassion is a virtue, that to care for others, to offer comfort, to reach out to those in pain is a sign of kindness. But Nietzsche saw something far more complex and, in some cases, dangerous, lurking beneath compassion. To him, compassion could become a trap, not only for the one receiving it, but especially for the one giving it. According to Nietzsche, compassion didn't always stem from genuine love. Sometimes it arose from weakness, the desire to subtly control by making oneself essential and irreplaceable. The act of helping, then, came laced with hidden motives. Nietzsche observed that pity was often used as a means of control. When someone is vulnerable, they're more likely to accept help without resistance. And the person offering that help, aware of this, might foster a dependency, a silent debt, an emotional form of manipulation. He argued that this dynamic wasn't just ethically questionable, it was spiritually corrosive. Helping another should never be about feeling superior, nor about keeping the other bound. In his eyes, there was a vast difference between true generosity and manipulative compassion. This idea shows up clearly in everyday life. Consider a relationship where one partner constantly says, "I do everything for you. You wouldn't survive without me." At first, it sounds like affection, but soon it becomes clear that the gesture doesn't come from abundance, but from neediness. It's a way to keep the other weak, dependent, and submissive. That's not love, it's control. Pity is the tool the weak use to gain power. Friedrich Nietzsche. And to Nietzsche, this kind of power was the most dishonest of all because it hides itself. It doesn't look like domination. It poses as selflessness. And this disguise, this moral camouflage, was what disturbed the philosopher most. Moreover, Nietzsche believed that this kind of compassion actually hindered growth. When someone is constantly shielded from pain, they miss the chance to grow stronger. They remain trapped in their fragility, reliant on their rescuer. The cycle continues, and no one evolves. He proposed a more difficult, yet more honest approach. Help, yes, but not to bind. Help to liberate, to empower, to push the other toward their own greatness. And that kind of help is only possible when it comes from a place of inner peace, not a wounded ego. In other words, to help with a full heart, not from emotional lack. To Nietzsche, true virtue wasn't in easing someone's pain, it was in inspiring them to transcend it. And in that sense, compassion, when used as a chain, becomes one of the most deceptive and cruel forms of weakness, masquerading as love. The overflowing strength, magnanimity versus pity. While Nietzsche believed compassion could conceal dark motives, he also recognized the existence of a noble, sincere, and grand form of help, what he called magnanimity. True strength, he argued, doesn't seek applause, it doesn't crave submission, it simply exists. And when someone is truly complete, secure in themselves, aligned with their own will, they can offer help to others without expecting anything in return. They help not out of a need to feel superior, but because they are overflowing with inner abundance. It's like a chalice filled to the brim. It spills over naturally. In this case, generosity doesn't stem from weakness, but from fullness. It's not pity, it's power. Nietzsche noted that the weak often help to feel strong, but the genuinely strong assist others because they already possess strength. They don't care about recognition. They feel no need to bind others in gratitude. They help to set people free, not to keep them under control. This kind of quiet, generous strength is rare and often mistaken for weakness. Yet it holds a profound power, one that doesn't need to be displayed. It's evident in actions, in silence, in the absence of demand. Only those who are whole can give without needing to dominate. Friedrich Nietzsche. This is the kind of strength Nietzsche wished to see blossom in humanity. A force with no disguises, no dependencies, no hidden motives. A strength that inspires, not oppresses. And perhaps that's why Nietzsche was so often misunderstood. Many accused him of cruelty, of coldness, of lacking compassion for those who suffer. But in truth, he wished for everyone to rise above suffering, not to be imprisoned by it. He dreamed of a world where no one lived chained to another's pity, but where each person discovered within themselves the spark that sets them free. Magnanimity is the very opposite of manipulation. It is freedom made manifest in action, and only those who have transcended their own pain can offer it sincerely. The will that creates meaning, overcoming, and direction. For Nietzsche, there was nothing more vital than the will, but not just any will. He referred to a will that is disciplined, empowered, and aligned with a higher purpose. A will that does more than wish. It acts. It overcomes. He believed life only becomes bearable and meaningful when we manage to unify our impulses and inner forces into a single focused direction. And doing so demands effort. It demands clarity. It requires the courage to say no to 1,000 distractions in order to say yes to a path that truly reflects who we are. Nietzsche envisioned the Übermensch, or Overman, as someone who creates their own values, who follows their own principles, and who remains steadfast even amid chaos. This wasn't about arrogance. It was about inner sovereignty. The Overman doesn't rule others. He rules himself. Become who you are. Friedrich Nietzsche. This phrase captures his philosophy of self-overcoming. It's not an easy path. It calls for deep self-awareness, discipline, and inner confrontation. It means letting go of a life led by randomness and instead taking full responsibility for one's own journey. It's about building, with effort and authenticity, the person one wishes to become. Nietzsche saw this ability to direct the will as the antidote to nihilism. While the nihilist drowns in doubt, denial, and despair, the strong individual makes a choice. They commit. And through that commitment, they move forward. When we fail to structure our desires, they pull us in opposite directions. One day we crave one thing, the next we contradict ourselves. This internal chaos leads to paralysis, and that paralysis is the root of the weakness Nietzsche so vehemently condemned. For him, a person who lives this way is constantly shaped by their environment, by others, by circumstance. But the one who commands their own will finds meaning even in pain. They carve their path even when the ground beneath them is uncertain. This is the distinction between the weak and the strong. One merely survives, the other builds. One adapts, the other asserts. Nietzsche wasn't urging us to become flawless heroes. He envisioned us as beings in continuous evolution. Life to him was an unfinished masterpiece, and the will, the essential tool of its creation. To organize the will is to choose to live with purpose, and perhaps that is the greatest strength a human being can attain. Amor fati, loving fate even through pain. Nietzsche was never a philosopher of comfort. His worldview was shaped by stones, thorns, and abysses, but also by elevation. And within this harsh landscape, he introduced an idea that at first seems almost impossible: to love one's fate. Amor fati, the love of fate, is one of the most iconic concepts in his philosophy. But it doesn't mean passive acceptance or quiet resignation. It is something deeper, more intense. To love fate is to desire that everything, yes, even the suffering, the loss, the downfall, happened exactly as it did. Not as punishment, but as an essential part of one's being. Nietzsche was no stranger to pain. Much of his life was spent in illness, isolation, and debilitating physical episodes. Yet it was precisely in that adversity that he found the strength to turn pain into power. Instead of becoming bitter, he wrote. Instead of retreating, he reflected. Instead of complaining, he created. To him, pain wasn't something to avoid. It was something to absorb and transcend. It was part of the journey toward becoming one's true self. He once wrote, "My formula for human greatness is amor fati." That one does not want anything to be different, not in the past, not in the future. Friedrich Nietzsche. This kind of love demands tremendous inner strength, because to love one's fate is to embrace even what we don't understand. It's to hold reality close without needing to explain it away. It's to look at your scars and recognize them as an inseparable part of your beauty. Nietzsche saw in this mindset a spiritual revolution, a turning point, the moment we stop being life's victims and become its authors. Not because we control every detail, but because we choose our stance in the face of what comes. Interestingly, Nietzsche found in Jesus an example of this strength, not in the institutional religion he often criticized, but in the man who endured suffering without resentment, who faced death holding firmly to his truth. For Nietzsche, loving fate means living without disguise, without escape. It's the radical affirmation of life, even when it hurts. And only those who possess true strength can do that. This love isn't easy. It doesn't come quickly, but it frees. Because ultimately, to accept life in its entirety is the first act of transforming it. Philosophies of weakness and the death of the spirit. Nietzsche was never afraid to confront the giants of philosophy. He didn't spare Socrates, Plato, or even Schopenhauer. Why? Because in his view, each of them, at some point, rejected life. For Nietzsche, turning away from life was the gravest philosophical error. He had no tolerance for doctrines that portrayed suffering as virtue, or that praised the denial of the body, the senses, and desire. He saw such ideas as pure weakness, a surrender masked as moral elevation. Every philosophy that denies life is a disease. Friedrich Nietzsche. To him, philosophies that glorify renunciation or dream of a world beyond do so not from strength, but from inability to face reality. These ideas don't empower, they soothe. And that comfort, though temporarily calming, comes at a steep cost, the death of the spirit. Nietzsche detected this dynamic in certain strands of religion, especially in Pauline Christianity, not in the figure of Jesus, whom he admired as a symbol of inner strength, but in how his message was later distorted. For Nietzsche, the overemphasis on guilt, repression of desire, and fixation on an afterlife reward reflected a sickened culture. This rejection of life fuels nihilism. When existence is seen only as a trial to be endured, people lose their vitality, enthusiasm fades, creative power stalls. What remains is resignation, a lukewarm life without fire, without direction. Nietzsche called this passive nihilism, a condition where life loses its flavor because all natural drives have been suppressed. Traditional values, instead of strengthening us, turn us into domesticated beings, and it was that domestication he feared most. He believed that modern society had been infected by philosophies of weakness, systems of thought that teach us not to embrace life, but to retreat from it, to distrust the body, to avoid joy, to suffocate our desires. For Nietzsche, a true philosophy must affirm life. It must not hide it, deny it, or disguise it with lofty words. It must awaken, ignite, and call us to act, because the moment we begin to deny life, we've already started dying from within. To be strong is to be honest. We now arrive at the most delicate point in this entire journey. Honesty. For Nietzsche, true strength isn't just about the bravery to act. It's about the bravery to face the truth. No masks, no excuses, no moral disguises. At its core, strength is honesty. It's the willingness to admit what you feel, what you want, and what you fear. It's recognizing when you're weak, but refusing to hide behind that weakness. It's refusing to wear the cloak of compassion as a tool for manipulation. It's refusing to use morality as an excuse for inertia. It's refusing to lie to yourself. Nietzsche understood how painful truth could be, but he believed it was the only path to healing. Lies, no matter how comforting, create unseen cracks that eat away at us from within. Truth, no matter how uncomfortable, sets us free. It is not brute strength that lifts us, but the strength of being true to ourselves. Friedrich Nietzsche. And that kind of truth requires confrontation. Confrontation with our shadow, with the desires we've buried, with the fears that freeze us, but also confrontation with the light within, the one that keeps reminding us we are more than we've been taught to settle for. Nietzsche didn't despise the weak because he felt superior. He despised them because he knew what weakness can destroy, quietly, slowly, with a smile. At its core, his call to us is this: own your will. Bring order to your chaos. Speak your truth, and don't hide behind weakness, because life is hard, but lies are harder. If this reflection stirred something inside you, don't ignore it. Weakness doesn't vanish on its own. It is overcome through awareness, effort, and truth. Align your will, choose life with conviction, refuse the masks. Here we see clarity, inner strength, and real transformation. If you feel it's time to change, you're in the right place. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to the channel. Join our community of self-overcoming and conscious living, because here, weakness finds no refuge,